Hey, Louise here, and I am so excited to share this little pattern with you. It's a placemat, and I love it. It's wonderful. It goes together so easy, and I'm going to show you how you can make this yourself. I think these flying geese just make it stand out so well. With this trim out here, oh, you're going to love it. Let me show you how to make this. Opening up new fabrics in the mail is always so exciting. Mrs. Quilty, particularly so because we don't know what's in it. This is a surprise. But this box is extra special. Mrs. Quilty has changed their boxes to improve them. It's going to be suited to exactly what quilters are looking for, and I want to show you what's inside. We have our traditional package with the pattern book, which is something we're familiar with. And here's a little oops card that tells us, oh, we made a printing mistake, so we get the correction included, which is awesome, because sometimes that can be frustrating when you're making a project and go, wait, something isn't quite right. So the magazine is going to show you everything that's in here. We have a list with all the fabrics, the patterns, and look at these fabrics. Oh my goodness, they are so pretty. I can't wait to show you. And I already have a project picked out. We'll get to that in just a minute. But I want to show you what we have in here. So let's look at fabrics first. That's just always what gets our attention, right? What's different about the fabrics is previously we would get 8 different fabrics and in a bundle, and then that bundle would be doubled. So we would get 16 pieces of fabric and they would be duplicated, and that was always fine with me because I can always find a way to use fabrics, and having a little larger quantity isn't a problem. Okay, this isn't working in the box. There we go. And so I just want you to see some of these patterns. Oh my goodness, look at all the shades of blue. And there's red in there. This is very pretty. Oh my goodness. I mean, this is perfect for a quilt of valor if you like doing that. Red, white, and blue. We've got Veterans Day coming up. That's always a good one too. But there's just so much you can do. It's a nice, warm, light color selection, and it would be fabulous for a baby quilt or a lap quilt. Okay, so there's a lot here. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So we have 12 pieces. And like I said, instead of getting duplicates, we are getting individual fabrics. So let's see, 5, 10, 15. So it's 22 by, I'm pretty sure that's 18. So it's a full fat quarter. And before we didn't always get fat quarters. Sometimes they were, about 16 inches, but again, we had multiples, so it worked. But I think this is something that folks will really appreciate, is having the consistent size. Now, we're used to getting fun little bundles, little surprises, but check this out. Oh my goodness. This is something every quilter absolutely needs, a square ruler. Now, oh, and look at it. What I love, oh my gosh, I love the size, number 1. I think there's a piece on here that I need to peel off, and we'll get there. I'm not really good at doing that. Oh, there it is. Oh, well, that was easy. Okay, look. I'm going to put this on a white background so you can see what we're looking at. So it's a 6.5 inch, which is wonderful. Mine is 5, so this is a great size that I can definitely use. And we have the 1 inch grids, but look at this, 1/8 inch. So when we're doing smaller pieces and we need to measure, in maybe a smaller increment, like a 2.5 inch or a 3 inch, this is actually 3 right here. I mean, that's really versatile. That makes this very useful. And I like the 1/2 inch on here. Mine is just a square. I don't have the extra half, which is nice. So this is going to be wonderful. And check these out. Some pretty pins. And they're nice. They're long. They look good and sharp. And won't that look pretty in my pin cushion? Okay, so I think we have a great package here that we will appreciate and really get some good use out of. So thank you, Mrs. Quilty. We love it. And now I want to talk to you about what I'm going to make. I saw this placemat and I thought, how perfect is this? It's an easy pattern we have a flying geese block surrounding a center square, and that's a square with just a simple border around it. And then we've got our pieces out here, and oh, and look, oh, this is going to go together easy. Wait till you see how these blocks come together. This will really be fun, and I'm anxious to show this to you. Placemats are great fun to have, and it looks wonderful on the table, keeps things clean, and it's so easy for cleanup. You just shake them off and then put them in the wash, and you're good to go. And we have some fantastic instructions, exactly what I need to cut, and it actually suggests which fabrics to use. So if you want to make exactly this pattern, then this is where you're going to go with it. So what I'm going to do is get some fabric cut here. Okay, and then here's the finish. And there's our center block, then we assemble it. That's going to go together quite easily. So let me go ahead and get my ruler, and we'll get started here. Usually I do like to press my fabrics before I start. So I'm going to take a look at these. I think I may need to press them because they are folded quite well, so they'll stay flat. So I want to get those creases out. Let me go ahead and press these, and I'll be right back, and we'll start some cutting for our placemat. This placemat has flying geese around the center of the block. So we are going to make individual flying geese blocks, and we use a rectangle and a smaller square, and we draw a line from corner to corner. Now this is the traditional method, and probably just about the easiest when you're doing a small number of them. So we have our line drawn from corner to corner, just like this, and then that's the line we're going to follow, and we want to make sure that these corners line up. All right, and I'm going to do the next one. So there's 4 of these in the pattern around the center of the placemat, and I'll go through these real quick, then we're going to turn it around and do the other side. But I do have, sorry, I've got a bunch of threads here. I do have a little trick I want to show you about utilizing excess fabric. I am one who doesn't like to throw fabric away. If it's more than an inch, there's got to be something to do with it, right? I'm going to turn this. I obviously may have cut that wrong. Let's see. Put that there and there. There we are. Okay. Cut that a little scant, so I just centered it in the rectangle. So what I'm going to do now, ordinarily at this point, we would just cut this off at the 1/4 inch, and then we would set this aside and do whatever we will with it. I'm going to show you, if you take an extra step right now and sew a 1/2 inch seam. So you want to be a 1/2 inch away from this seam here. Just like this. I'm going to go all the way through. And this is something I do on with any pattern that has triangles, half square triangles, things of that nature. So I'm going to cut this off, and this is for my placemat. And then what I'm going to have is a string of small half square triangles that I can use for another project, like for making a scrappy quilt, or maybe I can incorporate this in the backing of the quilt, the little placemat that I'm making now, and maybe use these for a, like making, what am I trying to say, a label. So it keeps them all together, so when I know I'm pulling these out of my pile, I'll know how many of a particular color that I have. So now at this point, I'm going to press these, and what I'm going to do is finger press these right now. I do recommend you do it with your iron because you'll get a nice clean fit. I think it'll lay nicer. And I can just sort of do it as I go. You just have to be careful when you finger press on a diagonal seam that's on the bias that you don't stretch it, which is why I recommend using the iron. Now, the other thing I do when I'm sewing triangles, sewing from a corner, because that's a narrow spot to pick up and the threads tend to lock up on you. They can bunch up underneath. Hold them aside like this with your finger on it. And it's just going to sew nice and smooth because it's this top thread that will knot up underneath. So if you're holding it aside as you sew, you're not going to get the knotting or bunching. So I will go ahead and finish these, and from there we'll begin our block assembly to create our placemat. What I do want to show you is when you turn this over, you've got a nice pretty little flying geese, and it'll be nice and flat. Now you should have about 1/4 of an inch up here, so that we have our seam allowance. We don't want to cut off the beak of our flying geese. And then we want these to come right down, these seams come right down into that corner. So let me get everything trimmed and pressed, and I'll be back and show you how to put this all together. It's not uncommon when you're making a quilt block that you do what's called a sub-assembly. So this entire piece goes across the block, but I need to connect multiple pieces together in order to get the entire piece that I need in order to fit to create the design. So what I'm going to do is sew these two together, and I just want to make sure that my corners line up well. And I take my 1/4 inch seam. Again, I hold that thread out there so it doesn't get knotted up underneath, and then I want to line my corner up down here. And I need 2 sets of these, one for the top and one for the bottom. So I'm just going to chain stitch them and put them together at the same time. It saves a little time for me, and again, it keeps things together so I know what goes where. Just want to make sure. There we go. We line everything up and run my seam down, and again, line this corner up. So once I get those first few stitches in, I will make sure my corners line up here. Do you see how that fabric bows a little bit? That's because when we cut the fabric, the weave loosens along that edge and it relaxes the fabrics as it sort of ravels out. So just kind of tuck it in just the littlest bit. I mean, it's not much, but I don't like losing that. I want to make sure that fabric stays where it needs to be. Otherwise, my block could become a bit distorted, because if I'm taking too much fabric out of here, that may not lay as well as I'd like. Again, these are just little things I do along the way as I'm sewing, and take it with a grain of salt. Do what works for you. These are things to look at initially, and I always double check and make sure it looks right. And then as you sew and you quilt and you learn what works for you, you'll just, do your own thing. And that's sort of how we all fit into it. There's some basics we want to make sure we cover when we're quilting. See how that bows? That's what I'm talking about. There we are. Just a little bit there. All right, and one more. And again, I want to make sure that my angles are going in the correct direction. And this is all in the pattern book. So I'm not giving you specific details on each and every piece because it's all in the pattern book. And should you decide to, get a Mrs. Quilty box, then you will have all the information you need, because there's, I believe, 5 different patterns to choose from regular quilt blocks to individual items like this, like there's a matching pot holder and a matching mug rug. So if you like making sets of things, which would be a great gift with the holidays or as a housewarming or wedding gift, it's just kind of a fun project to put together. All right, let me just put all that aside there. So the center square is pretty simple. Let me get some thread going everywhere here. And it's just a little narrow border around the edge. And I did change my colors up a little bit because I didn't want so much white across the middle of the placemat, because this will get used and I don't want that white to get stained. Okay, now see how I have a little extra? My seam allowances must be on the narrow side. It shows that, or I cut this. Let's see, this was cut at 4.5. So this should measure 4 inches, and it measures just a tad over. And these should be 6.5. And so this is where, when we do our own cutting, we do have to be careful. So what I'm going to do is, this is what I call my split the difference method. Is I will pick this up on the outside. When I'm done, I will measure this to make sure it's the right finished size. And I obviously overcut these a little wider, these 1.5 inch pieces. So I've got them even on each side, and go for my 1/4 inch and make sure these seams press to the outside. And do the same here, which I'll probably have the same problem with my seam allowance, which is a good thing. That means at least I'm consistent. If they were off, then we'd be having a heck of a time figuring it out. What the hell, my thread, my fabric folded over. All right, so we have this. I'll get this press and trim it and get those extra edges off. But well, 2 things I want to share with you. First, I did cut these wrong. These were 1.5. I cut them at 1 3/4. That's why I had the excess. But the great news is I now have a 6.5 inch square ruler. So I used my new ruler. I lined it up and got it all squared, making sure that I had 1 1/4 inch to each edge. And I put it on here and I just trimmed around it. Worked beautifully. We have another subset assembly that we need to do. And again, that's a partial block, and I'm going to put the flying goose block, flying gleese, I can't say it. We're going to put the triangle on top, and I'm just going to hold my threads with my finger as I sew this down, making sure to keep to my 1/4 inch, making sure this is nice and straight. All right, so we have this. Now we're going to put another one right here. And this guy is going to go like this. See how we're getting our continuation of our outer border for the square? So we have a square in the middle, and this becomes the outer square, but it's turned on point. So we're creating a square and a square. I'm turning this over because if I sew this, I'm going to go straight across. Not a problem, but I want to be able to see that seam so that when I get to that point, I make sure I don't cut off my goose's beak. So let me show you how that works. So again, I want to get these seams right there in the corner and lay that down nice and flat, hold my thread aside and begin sewing. And then I'm going to come over here and make sure this lines up right there in the corner. And see how this wants to drop in? Kind of bring it up a little bit. Again, it's just the way the fabric will sort of pull itself after it's cut, especially when you're working with diagonal cuts. Now, while we're here, let's take a look at this. I'm going to lift this up so you can see it. You see how I have a seam that goes this way and a seam that goes this way? That spot right there is the beak of the goose right there. And see that right here? So when I'm sewing, I want to make sure, I'm trying to hold this so you can see it. Here we go. When I'm sewing, I want to make sure I want to be on the seam allowance side of my point. If I sew on this side towards the flying geese block, body, so to speak, then we cut off the beak, but we want to hang on to that beak, so we're going to stay to this side. And when you're dealing with flying geese, that's probably one of the most important things you want to make sure that you get right. Now, this is sort of, there we are, lace flat. This is coming in a little bit, and I'm going to let it stay that way because that's going to work for me. Because when I get to this point, I'm going to be right on that seam where I want it to be. Just like this. And so if you can see that, my seam goes right through that point there. And then when we open it, our flying geese, of course, that we haven't sewn yet, but that's looking great. And see how we have the entire beak right there in the corner. And we have it on the other side as well. So everything here looks really good. And I think that's fantastic. I'm ready to put some more of this together. So the first thing I'm going to do is add our top piece. Remember, this is the first sub-assembly that we did. And we want to make sure as we're putting this together that our dots, our square, our design lines up. And, you know, if you've got it going this way, it's like, wait, no, something's wrong. So just, you know, everything does sort of kind of come together. And we just want to make sure that it all fits and looks just the way we want. Now, a couple things. When we are sewing flying geese together, we have this point at the top, and again, just like we did here, where is it? Here, we want to make sure we don't cut that point off. So I am going to set up my seams, align them nice and even here, and two things. I want to nest my seam. See how this seam is a little farther over? I want those to be right in line. See how that goes there, and here my seam is all the way over here? So I want to have them right next to each other so that we're going to get a good fit. And then I'm going to do a little pinch test and make sure that my geese are not getting cut off. And then I'm going to pin right here. So that should put me in good shape. Now I'm going to do the same thing over here. So I'm going to align the seam. I'm going to nest them. Sorry for all these threads. I had some ravel going on there. And then I have the top of my beak here and here. I'm going to line them up and make sure everything is nice and straight. And my beaks line up. There it is. My beak lines up there. Yep. And now I'm going to put a pin on this side. With everything pinned, I am now going to sew it together with a 1/4 inch seam. I have my pins along the way. And just make sure everything's nice and even. There we are. And pull my pin out as I get close to it, making sure I keep straight. Sometimes these little corners want to pop up on you. There we go. Make it through that one. And okay, 2 straight seams. I couldn't remember. I thought there might be a corner there, another point, but that's my interior block. Come here. All right, and here we go. So this is what we want. We want our lines. I'm a little bit off. Well, let's see. Yeah, I guess I'm a little bit. I could actually go back. Oh, see what happened? Look, I was sewing and my needle went up and over because that's a thick seam. So if I come back and I just straighten that out, then that's going to line up. Let me show you. Just in case something like this happens to you. So two things that happened. I pulled out a pin and it was thick, so my fabric shifted and caused me to sew around. See, look at that. That looks much better. And this is lined up. Look at, these are all looking great. All right, so we are there. Now it's just a matter of finishing it, but you know how to complete this. And you can see that it's a great project. It makes a beautiful piece, and I really like how this has turned out. Well, now that you've seen how easy it is to make this, are you ready to make your own? I think this turned out beautifully. And look at the pretty back with the butterfly fabric. This fabric is absolutely gorgeous. I love how it turned out. And I hope you're going to give Mrs. Quilty a try. Just check on the link below and you can get signed up for it right away. Thanks so much for being here. It's always a pleasure to have you join me. Have a great rest of your day.